Auto Rifles, held by many as the best and easiest to use weapon class in Destiny 2, today we are going to take a look at the statistical DPS of each archetype. In this video, we are going to look at DPS from 6 different auto rifles, one 720 RPM energy, one 600 RPM energy, and one 450 RPM energy. We'll also look at one 600 RPM primary, one 450 RPM primary, and one 360 RPM primary. The reason why we are not going to be looking at any primary 720 RPM auto rifles or energy 360 RPM auto rifles is because I don't believe that any exist. To my knowledge, Hawkeye makes the only 360 RPM auto rifles, and they only make primaries. 720 auto rifles are only made by Vice, and they make energy weapons. One thing to note before we start with the actual numbers and damage chests is that primary weapons do around 10% more damage than energy weapons in PvE only. This means that just because you see Uriel's Gift doing 10% less DPS in the origin story, doesn't mean the origin story is better in PvP, because in PvP, they do the same amount of damage per shot. These tests were all performed on a 300 late level Cabal outside of the entrance to the Leviathan raid at a distance of 4 meters in order to ensure that no guns suffer from damage falloff. Also, there is no difference between the damage of a 335 late level Guardian and a 334 late level Guardian in the activity I was testing the weapons in. I just wanted to be clear about this because in some of my tests I'm 334, and in others I'm 335. The first stat we're going to look at is crit multiplier. All the autos that I've tested are within 1.23 and 1.304 crit multiplier. They're all really close, so I'm not really going to be mentioning them as they're all pretty much the same. The first weapon we are going to look at is a Loquitur 4. This is a 300 RPM primary, and as seen in the test, it does 200 damage to the body and 250 to the head. This gives the weapon a DPS for body shots of 1200 damage per second. Using headshots, this number jumps up to 1500. The next auto we will look at is the infamous Uriel's Gift. This is a 450 RPM energy weapon. As seen in the test, it does 153 damage to the body and 191 damage to the head. Its DPS from all body shots is 1147.5. With all headshots, this number moves up to 1432.5. Next up, Origin Story, this 450 RPM primary does 170 to the body and 213 to the head. This data proves the 10% rule, as it deals 9% more damage than the Uriel's Gift. Origin Story has a DPS of 1275 for body shots and 1597.5 to the head. Ghost Primus, the primary 600 RPM auto rifle, does 125 to the body and 163 to the head. This gives it a DPS of 1250 for body shots and 1630 for headshots. The No Calamity 9, the energy 600 RPM auto, does 113 to the body and 146 to the head. This gives it a DPS of 1130 to the body and 1460 to the head. Finally, the Valkyrien Energy 720 RPM auto rifle does 99 to the body and 124 to the head. This gives it a DPS of 1188 to the body and 1488 to the head. Now that we have all the numbers, let's look at comparisons. We can see that the rankings for highest body shot DPS go from number 6, 1130 for the 450 energy rifle, number 5, 1147 for the 600 RPM energy, 1188 for the 720 RPM energy, 1200 for the 360, 1250 for the 600 primary, 1275 for the 450 primary. Using headshot damage, the order changes slightly, but not that much, to number 6, 1432 for the 450 energy, number 5, 1460 for the 600 energy, number 4, 1488 for the 720, number 3, 1500 for the 360, number 2, 1597.5 for the 500 primary, and number 1, 1630 for the 600 RPM primary. As you can see, the rankings are very similar, as the only difference is that the 600 primary and 450 primary switch places in the body shot and headshot counts. The auto rifles are all very close in their DPS counts for each weapon. Really, the biggest factor in the damage count for each weapon is just its energy slot, as the 10% rule really kicks in, dooming all 3 energy weapons to be lower than the primaries in both tests. The 360 autos are doing much less than the other two. Unless you really like using the 360s, you should probably not use them if you're going for an optimal DPS. The 450 and 600 RPMs are almost interchangeable, as both the energy and the primary ones are remarkably close as well. Again, you can really just use whatever gun you like best. In conclusion, for auto rifles, you can really use whatever you want. The 600 RPMs only do slightly more than the 450s, which only do slightly more than the 720s. The only outlier from this test is the 360s, which do a decent amount less damage than the other rifles in both tests. So really, you can just use whatever you like best. It doesn't really matter.